great to be here. It's great to have the opportunity once again to be able to worship God together, to be able to sing Him praises and give Him glory and honor. I'm excited every time we have this opportunity, and I've been really excited about the series we've been doing, both on Sunday morning and on Sunday night. On Sunday night, we've been studying through the book of Habakkuk, and we titled this series, Sparring with God, because that's sort of what takes place here is Habakkuk asks a question to God, and God will respond, and he'll ask a question back, and it almost seems like a struggle as he attempts to rationalize some of these questions that people often have with God. One of the things that we've noticed in this series, and I've mentioned it a couple of times before already, is that Habakkuk is very different from some of the other minor prophets. Whereas most of the other minor prophets will come with a message from God to Israel, here it almost seems that Habakkuk is coming to God with a message, or questions more than anything. And he's having a dialogue with God and then presenting that to Israel. The title of this evening's lesson is, Now the Rest of the Story. I can remember many times on my way to school, on my way driving other places, or getting driven other places, my mother would always turn on Mr. Harvey. And I would love to listen to the rest of the story. And as I was reading through Habakkuk chapter 2, that's all I could really have in my mind is not necessarily Paul Harvey, but the messages here, what happens next? Throughout the other lessons we've been looking at through Habakkuk, we've looked at the dialogue and the questions that many people often have and how God responds. But here, God is going to give what's happening next. Sometimes that's exactly what we want to know, isn't it? Well, when? When's it going to happen? What's going to happen next? What's going to happen to them? See, Habakkuk came with a problem. His problem was, Israel is evil. Your people are evil. They're doing evil things. When are you going to punish them? Habakkuk didn't ask if God was going to punish them, but when. And God said punishment was coming. And He surprised Habakkuk and said it was going to be at the hands of the Chaldeans. And now Habakkuk is filled with all manner of more questions. He wants to know, why the Chaldeans? Why this evil nation that's even worse than Israel is? How can you use them to punish Israel? How does that fit in with your justice? And we looked at that as well last week. Well, now, not only has Habakkuk had his first question answered, but now God's revealed that I'm going to punish Israel, and I'm even going to punish the nation that I'm using to punish Israel. He's kind of getting the third story down the line here. He's getting the whole end of everything. Sometimes we have questions. We may want to know, God, when? When is all this going to take place? When is finally these kind of things going to happen we've been waiting for? We don't always get the answers we want. We don't always have the answers that we may be looking for. But the interesting thing here is Habakkuk gets those answers. If you will, turn with me to Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 2. And our text for this evening's lesson is verses 2 through 20. I'm going to have it up here on the screen beside me. But as always, I would encourage and urge you to follow along in your Bibles as well. Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 2, all the way down to verse 20. And the Lord answered me, Write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. But the righteous shall live by his faith. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he has never enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects as his own all peoples. Shall not all these take up their taunt against him, with scoffing and riddles for him, and say, Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own! For how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will be spoiled for them, because you have plundered many nations. All the remnant of the people shall plunder you. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond, Woe to him who builds a town with blood, and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and make them drunk, in order to gaze at their nakedness. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and as a destruction of the beasts that terrified them, for the blood of man, and violence to the earth, to cities and all who dwell in them. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, Awake, to a silent stone, Arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Thank you for following along in that reading with me. I know it was a little lengthy. Hopefully this will help us understand a little better about what we're talking about tonight. First, I want us to look at the fact that the Lord answers. You may remember at the end of our last lesson, in chapter 2 and verse 1, Habakkuk said, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Habakkuk was waiting at the watchtower. Surely it's not talking about a physical tower he's staying at here. He's ready for the response. He's waiting. He doesn't seem like he has to wait long, and God responds. He gives an answer. So first, this evening, we're going to look at the fact that the Lord answers. Second, we're looking at the fact that justice isn't slow. Sometimes it may seem that way, and sometimes through the scope that we're wanting things fulfilled, sometimes we think justice is just moving too slow. But that's another thing we're going to talk about tonight. Third and finally, we're going to look at the fact that evil does have an answer. It seems to me oftentimes in our lives that evil goes unanswered, it goes unpunished, it gets away with it. But we're going to see tonight that evil does have an answer. First, the Lord answers. It's important for us to realize this fact. Many times when we pray for things and we don't get it to turn out quite how we want, we assume God doesn't answer. You might ask, well, then where's the pony I asked for when I was a little kid? Where's that Christmas present I always wanted? What about all those hard times I had and I prayed and I asked God, deliver me out of this hardship? What about all those things I've ever asked for? If the Lord answers, then why do I not have these things I've asked for? Sometimes we make a huge mistake. We assume that the only answer a person can give is yes. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7, Jesus said, Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. Well, someone might say, see, Jesus said, if I ask, he's going to give it to me. If I merely ask for something from him, I am guaranteed to get it. I don't believe that's exactly what Jesus meant here. I think all of this context is framed in the will of God. Not to mention, James clarifies a little further when he mentions sometimes you don't receive things because you don't ask, and sometimes it's because you ask to fill your own passions. It's not necessarily things you need. I read a quote not very long ago by Garth Brooks. He may not seem like the greatest philosopher in the world, but he said this, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in it. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. If God had answered every prayer, everything I'd ever asked for, I'd be a much less happy man. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but that's the way I'm going to word it. If there were every prayer that had ever been made answered, you'd have a lot of unhappy people in this world. You would have chaos. Can you imagine if everything you've ever asked for you had? How many times have you looked back on and said, wow, I'm glad that God didn't answer that prayer. That is not what I needed. That's just what I thought I needed. I can remember when I was 16 and I was getting ready to have my first car. We went and we looked at this particular Mustang. and I was excited. This man had 2 Mustangs for sale, and one of them was a stick shift V8. It was black with black interior. I was excited. And my mom said no. I ended up getting a little 4-cylinder white Mustang with a red interior. It didn't go very fast. I think it went from 0 to 60 in 6 minutes. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but it was at least close. It wasn't sporty in anything but the name. And I can remember praying, please let me get this. Please let me have the nice sporty car. 3 days after I got my license, I was on my way to work, and I got T-boned going through an intersection. Luckily, I came out of it pretty well unharmed. And it's then I thought, what if I'd been in that little sporty number? What if I'd had just a few more hooked horses under that hook? What would have happened to me then? I had a friend of mine who had a Camaro, and boy, he got the sports car he wanted. He ended up getting a little too far over into the median, slipped on some wet grass, and went head-on into a semi. Luckily, he survived. What might have happened if that prayer had been answered? That's just a personal example from my own life. I'm sure there's something you can think about in your mind. Something that you've asked for. And maybe from the blinders that you had on at the moment, it seemed like just what you needed. You see, sometimes God answers no, and sometimes He says, not right now, I have something better coming for you. But aren't we happy we don't always get what we ask for? The Lord answers. Maybe you don't get a response like Habakkuk. Maybe you don't say, God, I want to know when this is going to happen. And a voice from heaven doesn't come booming into your ears and say, well, Jacob, this is exactly what's going to happen and when. Maybe that's not the answer we always get. But it's important to remember the Lord does answer. One thing in particular we have to look to is that we've been given everything we need pertaining to life and godliness. Peter tells us that we have everything we need pertaining to life and godliness. What security, what peace. I wonder if Habakkuk would have felt differently if he had what we have now, the collective works and the way that we have them. Boy, what peace there can be found here. Many occasions when someone is going through something that is terribly heartbreaking, I'll encourage them to read Psalms. When someone is finding themselves having made some really tough decisions in their life, and there's some things they feel like they need to do but are hard to do, or maybe they're not really sure what the right thing is, I encourage them to read Proverbs. Proverbs has a lot of practical wisdom there. The Bible really helps quite a bit. That's probably the understatement of the year. We've been given everything we need pertaining to life and godliness. God answers even if it's not always the way we want. I'm sure Habakkuk didn't get the response he wanted. He might have been expecting that the Lord was going to send a plague on Israel. He might have been expecting maybe some fire to rain down from heaven. Maybe he was expecting the Lord to, as he had done before, send snakes into Jerusalem and to destroy those that would not look up to another bronze serpent. Whatever the response might have been, I'm sure he wasn't expecting, I'm sending this evil enemy of your nation to destroy you. But God answers. Second, justice isn't slow. Well, Jacob, I know you're wrong on this one. Justice is sometimes pretty slow. Sometimes it takes years and years and years. Sometimes it seems like someone goes through their entire life without having justice dispensed on them. It may seem slow. But notice in our very text, in chapter 2 and verse 3, if it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Now specifically, what the Lord is talking about here is the things concerning the Chaldeans and the justice dispensed on them. But that's not an isolated principle. I seem to recall Paul saying in the book of Romans, quoting out of the Old Testament actually, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. I seem to recall Asaph having quite the same dilemma. Seeing people prosper even though they were wicked. Seeing people never having trouble even though they were doing evil things. And when he went and inquired in the house of the Lord, he realized their end. That those that seem to prosper here ultimately will have nothing in the afterlife of any worth. So it matters not that they prosper here. It may seem slow to us, but in reality it's not. Why why not now? Isn't that the question that everyone likes to ask? Why not now? Why not on my time frame? One of my favorite examples of this is found in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 16. Here the covenant's being repeated to Abraham. They're entering into a formal covenant procedure. He has Abraham get these particular animals and to cut them in half and to spread them. And then God walks through them. Formal covenant procedure that day showing that God was promising on His own life that He would complete the things that were being said. It's a very interesting background study there. But what really interests me is while God is telling Abraham of the things that are going to be happening, He's saying, your people are going to go away and be slaves. They're going to be slaves in another nation. And they're going to be there after the fourth generation. Chapter 15, verse 16 says, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. You see, He promised this land. He said, but you're not going to have it all right now. It's going to be generations down the line. Why? Why not now? Why did Abraham not own so much as a foot's breadth on it? Why could Abraham not have something for his possession to live on? Why did God not give it to Isaac or to Jacob? Why were they not handed over the land of Canaan? Because the iniquity of the Amorites was not yet full. You see, the Amorites was a large group in the land of Canaan. And I believe this is meant to stand for the Canaanites as a whole. The Amorites being one of the groups that largely are popular in that area. God was sending Israel not to just give them this nation, but to punish a nation that was acting evilly. If you trace this line back, it goes back to Ham. You remember Ham, the son of Noah? The son of Noah who did something he shouldn't have done? Isn't that interesting? This area where there were many nations that did evil things, that worshipped idols. And God said, not now, because the nation has not done enough bad stuff yet to warrant being dispossessed from their own land. The iniquity in the Amorites is not yet full. Did Abraham know that? Did Abraham know when the glass would finally be full? Did he know finally when God would have enough and send Israel in to wipe them out? He didn't know that. Do I know why some things are not happening in my life right now? Could I tell you why some things are not happening in your life right now? I don't have that knowledge, but God does. That's why it's important to remember that justice isn't slow, it's just working on a timetable that sometimes we're not able to comprehend. And that may be a good thing that we can't. John Whittier said, through the dark and stormy night, faith beholds a feeble light. Up the blackness streaking, knowing God's own time is best, in a patient hope I rest for the full day breaking. Sometimes we don't realize that that is exactly where faith comes into play. When we don't realize that what's right out in front of us, we may not be able to see. Faith provides that lamp to our feet and light to our path. Faith provides us something to follow, even if we can't see the end result. Faith allows us to trust God, even when we can't understand why. When we don't exactly know when or where. Faith is what prompted Abraham to get up and go when he wasn't sure where he'd be going. I can't give you all the answers you desire. But I can give you the only answer that matters, and that's faith. But just to help Habakkuk out a little more, he gives Habakkuk some earthly wisdom, some things that is just knowledge. He gives some woes. You may have noticed 5 woes in particular. The woe to the plunderer. What's going to happen to the plunderer? They're going to rise back up against you. That's some earthly wisdom. If you notice, that cycle tends to go. What happens to the plunderer? When you do evil things to other people, it usually comes back around and gets you, doesn't it? He gives another woe. Woe to those who gain through evil means. The Bible speaks to that in several places. You can find a couple of Proverbs, as well as a warning, qualification to those elders not to be greedy for filthy lucre, for those to not desire to gain by unjust means. He gives another woe to slave drivers. He gives another woe to those who are drunken. Now specifically here he mentions wine. But it seems not only from the context, but also a greater understanding of God's problem with the Chaldeans, that he uses this drunkenness on wine to make another point. The Chaldeans were proud. They were drunk on their own conquering. They were drunk on themselves and how great and mighty they were. Babylon ended up having the same problem after them. They were such a mighty nation. The kings thought so much of themselves, they didn't attribute to God the glory that was due to him. They didn't realize that God rules in the kingdom of men. When we read through Daniel, we see Daniel interacting with these kings, with the nation of Babylon, over and over and over again, showing them that God is the one in control. God is the one that gives to nations whom he wills. God is the one who puts someone as head over a nation. It's him that rules in the kingdom of men. He gives a woe to the idolater. And please understand that I am not trying to be derogatory when I say the foolishness of building an image yourself and then assuming that it's a God. I say that with an understanding that every man is subject to sin, that every man is subject to temptation. And I don't know perhaps if I was raised in a different society, if I had experienced several different things in my life that others have, then maybe I might have fallen into the same snare and deception. But think back to Israel. After seeing the plagues in Egypt, after crossing the Red Sea, after being taken care of in the wilderness, they come to Mount Sinai. They see the rumblings, the lightnings. They're told not to touch the mountain or they will die. And then Moses goes up and he stays a little too long for them. And they look to Aaron. And he fashions a golden calf and says, "This is what brought you out of Egypt." Now, I only know how to call a spade, and that's foolish. He just built it with his own hands. I like what he says to Moses when Moses comes back down. You see, in the first account, when it's going on, it says that Aaron formed it. But when Aaron's telling Moses, he said, "I just threw the gold into the fire, and out came this calf. I don't know how it happened." That sounds like an excuse I might use sometimes. Woe to the idolater, to think they can make unintelligence into intelligence. Think they can make the lame idol that has no life in it suddenly have life and speak. Evil has its retributions. Evil has punishments that are here in this world and able to see, ultimately capped off by idolatry. You see, these all have eternal implications as well. There will be eternal punishment for those that separate themselves from God by these and other such evil. Blaise Pascal said, "Justice and truth are two such subtle points that our tools are too blunt to touch them accurately." When I first heard this, I didn't like it. I didn't like Pascal simply because of some of his other thoughts on truth and finding it for certain. But it's an interesting point, especially as it applies to our lesson this evening. Sometimes I, in my feeble attempt to know what's going to happen in the future, to see a situation and know what is just, to know when punishment should be dispensed, I attempt to work with something that I can only bumble around with and never know for certain. See, God is the one that has the fine instruments that can fix this intricate puzzle. God is the one that has the knowledge and understanding. God is the one who is able to see into the heart. And He is the one that we should look to in situations like this. Maybe you've had a Habakkuk moment. Maybe you've seen things unfold in a way that didn't make sense to you. Maybe you've had a Habakkuk moment where you've wanted to change the outcome. Or you thought, this isn't the way it should be like this. Or we could take away Habakkuk for a moment. Maybe you've had a moment like Job. and you didn't understand why things were happening to you, you wish you could come to God and say, why? What have I done? What has my friend done? What has my family member done to deserve this? I want to leave you with this thought. Who are we? We're certainly not God. I don't believe it is sinful to ask him these questions. Obviously, it wasn't for Habakkuk. The motivation seems to play in quite a bit. But who are we? I don't have the knowledge of the Most High. I don't have the wisdom, the insight. I'm not perfect. I have problems myself. I'm certainly not fit to pass eternal judgment. Paul told the church at Corinth to judge no man before the time. See, it's very different than fruit inspecting and passing an eternal judgment on someone's salvation. Unfortunately, I'm not the one who died on that cross. I say unfortunately, I think I'm quite fortunate for that. Fortunately, Jesus paid that price for me. Fortunately, I have an all-knowing, all-powerful Creator in heaven who is going to be sitting in the seat of judgment, who I know will distribute justice evenly and perfectly. What's the rest of the story? It may not have a catchy ending like some of those radio programs I love to listen to so much. It may not have some surprise tidbit of knowledge, but it has the most amazing message ever heard. There is a God. He is alive. This God will sit in judgment and judge justly. And fortunately, not all of us will get what we used to deserve. Because Jesus came in the form of flesh, and He died so that we might live. He died so that these wrong, evil things that we have done would not be attributed to us, so that we could be washed, cleansed, to walk anew. Here this evening, we're here to encourage each other. We're here to praise and glorify God. We're here to learn with one another. I hope those things have been accomplished this evening. I hope that if there's something in your life that's causing you to struggle, something in your life that maybe you're questioning and need help with, that you'll let us encourage you, that you'll let us pray for you, that you'll let us help you. If perhaps you've gone through similar situations that have caused you great anguish, let us go before God's throne with you and for you. If you had need of the invitation, won't you come together on the stands?